Adventism is all about being in the world, but not of it. So if you are lower income in Adventism, you can't necessarily afford to be as insulated. And my grandparents lived on a farm out in the prairies. We had just listened to a very apocalyptic sermon about how God was coming. I'm sitting there, like as a kid, being told my mom's going to be to death in front of me for Jesus, and I need to be okay with that. My grandfather is driving past with a tractor. I'm sitting there freaking out. I'm 5, and I was like, I can't do it. I'm actually not good with this. I was looking at the tractor as my grandfather's driving past. My dad just used me as a tool to prop himself up as this spiritual warrior to his audience.
Yeah.
And that became this moment of, this might not be real. I started specifically asking my dad to stop using me in sermons. I gave him very specific, this makes me uncomfortable. I don't want you to do this anymore. Unfortunately for my mom, there are a few factors. I was given a variety of stories about her, like essentially that she was choosing to be sick.
What?
It was absolutely brutal to watch because over time you could see her disappearing. Her skin became very shallow, hair was falling out. She was throwing up all the time, so her teeth were falling out. Especially at the end there, she spent most of her life in bed in the dark. When she did pass away, the whole thing was weird. And I was told that she accidentally suffocated. I flew back home the same day that I was told that she passed away. All of her journals were in a garbage bag being hauled out the door before I could get to them. There was no emotional distress about my mom passing. It was like nothing had happened up until my mom's family arrived, and that's when the tears started.
Mine is the only voice.
Wow.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey guys, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you'd prefer to see our faces, you can go to YouTube at Cults to Consciousness. It's the best way to support the podcast when you can interact with the posts, liking, sharing, commenting those words of encouragement for our guests who are being brave, sharing their real stories, their darkest secrets sometimes, and their deepest traumas. It really makes them feel seen and validated and heard. Today's guest, I was connected to her from Melissa. So happy to be connected. It was one of those situations where I was like, hey, do you want to share your story? Great. Are you free tomorrow? So I love when those types of situations happen, and we'll talk about how she had already seen the channel before, which is super cool, but we're diving further into Seventh Day Adventism. So talking about her life growing up as a pastor's daughter, even getting married within the church, and some of the struggles that she watched her mother go through and how that affected her and how she's doing today. So thank you so much for joining us, Rosei Quartz.
Well, thank you so very much for having me. I just thought it was the coolest thing ever to have you reach out to me and be like, hey, do you want to share your story here? When your channel was one I was watching quite often during, like, when I was making the decision to leave Adventism and family in that community. And then here we are years later, full circle. And I was just like, oh yes, I would love to share my story here. So thank you for having me.
Yes, I love those moments. It's so cool for us too to realize that we've been a part of someone's deconstruction journey in a positive way, of course. It's so cool to see when people have these stories of, oh yeah, your channel helped in some way, and now you can come on and share your story and hopefully help someone else in the same way. So I love that so much, and I'm so happy that you're here.
Oh, I'm so ready. I'm so ready to jump into this because this has been a, like, dissecting cults, deconstruction. That's a special interest of mine. I will become an unskippable cutscene if you let me on this topic. So
Perfect. So let's get into your childhood and maybe just a brief overview of Seventh Day Adventist for those who aren't familiar.
Adventism is a cult cousin to like a bunch of the rest, like Jehovah's Witness in particular, from what I understand, but it originates with the cult of personality that was William Miller and the Great Disappointment. That's its own little rabbit hole that you can dive down, but essentially somebody with a little bit of a grandiose sense of self and a grifter complex decided that a specific verse in the Bible meant that Jesus was returning on a specific day. However, like as per the usual, when somebody like white in North America looks at scripture from a people group that they were not a part of from thousands of years ago, decides this is about me. William Miller found a verse that probably refers to an event in like Israelite history that already happened. And they were like, okay, this equals prophecy. And this prophecy is obviously about us. Because like I said, like the main character complex type of stuff. And he discovered essentially that people were falling for it. The Great Disappointment, this is the 1800s. You have a lot of vulnerable people who are just falling for this messaging that Jesus is coming again on this specific day. So you need to give all your belongings away. You just need to be ready for Jesus to come. You had people falling for this hook, line, and sinker back then. And William Miller kind of just disappeared after, of course, Jesus didn't come on the day that he specified. Personally, I think that, like, because people, like I said, were donating all of their stuff, he just took everything and booked it. Because, yeah, the spiritual grift was real. They had the tithing, collection plates, stuff like that. But instead of the movement dying off after William Miller disappeared, you have Adventism solidified in response. And they decided that, because the verse was in relation to the cleansing of the Holy Temple, like Jesus is in the sanctuary cleansing it of what? I'm not sure, because heaven's supposed to be sin-free. But their whole theory was that Jesus is in the most holy of holies, cleansing the temple, and he'll come back when he's done doing that. However, this is probably in reference to when, like, the Israelites got their temple back literally from being invaded for who knows how many times. They decided this is when Jesus is coming back. William Miller got it wrong. Jesus is still cleaning the temple. We just don't have... So Adventists went from like, we have a specific day to no specific day, but Jesus is definitely coming back again. And they, at the same time, they had a prophetess show up who, to anybody with two brain cells to rub together, it's pretty obvious that she had extensive brain damage from being walloped in her temporal lobe with a rock somewhere between the ages of 9 to 11. Like, she had a classmate just lob, it was either a rock or a chunk of ice, struck her about here, and she went unconscious for like weeks, came back out. Everyone decided it was a miracle. And as time went along, her family got into William Miller's evangelistic series. They went hard for it. Her father was also a hat maker, so there's some mercury poisoning exposure happening. But Ellen White got so into this series that she started having hallucinations and visions that aligned with William Miller's stuff in the Bible. And everyone, it's confirmation bias is what it is. Like, people being like, oh, Ellen White's visions align with the scripture, they align with the Bible. And I was like, well, that was the only thing her brain was exposed to at the time. She was doing nothing but sitting there listening to sermons. What else is she going to hallucinate about? That's why it aligns. That's exactly what she's exposed to. And that she essentially became the figurehead of the Adventist church, the spirit of prophecy, all of this stuff. Adventism, even though they don't let women speak, like they have this whole thing where women can't be ordained, their head person is a woman.
Crazy.
That makes sense. Yeah, wild. A little hypocritical there. But like I said, it's very clearly somebody with extensive brain damage being used as a figurehead. Because today, if somebody was saying they had visions about the end of the world after they took a rock to their temporal lobe, they'd be in the hospital. They'd be getting treatment. They wouldn't be a prophetess. They'd be getting medication and surgery and medical care. But this was the 1800s. And to this day, you have Adventists with a prophetess. Just, this isn't nearly as... Adventism is a massive organization, but most people don't really know that it exists.
And that's what we were talking about with Melissa, how it is a huge organization, but they're kind of hidden away, or at least that's on purpose. But at the same time, there's still some sort of effort to bring people in, right?
Yeah, they are a health-based organization, so you don't typically clock Adventists as being problematic in any way. They are very intentional about not being as weird as other organizations. Like, they know that people look at Jehovah's Witnesses' lack of birthdays and going door to door and stuff like that. And they're like, okay, we're not going to completely get rid of Christmas and stuff because that makes us look unhinged. We're not going to do the weird underwear stuff that makes us look unhinged. We're not going to marry children because, like, for FLDS, because that makes us look unhinged. Adventists are money first. The whole thing with that organization is about money. So you've got they present themselves with this message of, to be holy is to be healthy. If you are aligned with God, your physical appearance and your physical health will reflect your relationship with God.
That is a dangerous ideology.
Yes, which leads into like how my mom got to the point that she did. But Adventism is based on the ideology of, we keep the Sabbath holy, we eat a certain way, and we have the three angels message, like God's coming back. So once again, it speaks to that whole need to be special. We're God's special people, giving you a sense of identity, a sense of being special and apart from the world. But at a baseline, what you'll notice if you're really paying attention to Adventism is they're taking 10% of your tithe, and they're also selling you dietary plans. They're selling you marriage counseling. They're selling you school. They literally have their own medical system. Everything in this comes down to basically selling you the idea that if you can look this way, if you can live this way, you are healthy, you're aligned with God. And there are people who have poured so much of their time and their money and energy into embodying this. So Adventism, it's like personified hand sanitizer. That's what you're trying to be. You're trying to be as outwardly put together and presentable as possible. So there's no speaking in tongues, there's no rolling around on the floor, there's no, like, all of the things that typically pop out to you from other organizations. Adventism, like, has stayed away from it because they want to be well put together. They want to be presentable. They don't want things to fire off in your brain to be like, you guys are a little bit weird. They want to look appealing. So people don't typically clock Adventists as being with these other organizations as extreme. Yeah.
Yeah. So you grew up, or you're in Canada currently. Is that where you were born and raised?
Yes. So I got the small town prairie version of Adventism, which is its own special, unique brand. I was fortunate in that my parents were not quite as hardcore about Adventism as what some of my cousins got. My grandmother would tell me about some of my cousins who would go out into the garden and they'd eat peas and carrots and then bury the evidence that they've been eating because their parents believed that Ellen White says being overweight is a sin. Once again, going back to that whole idea of physical health equals salvation and rightness with God. So some of my cousins reportedly were intentionally starved to keep them thin.
Jeez, that's awful. And I know that sometimes they have full-on communities where you don't have to leave it to get anything, where, like you were saying, you have the schools and the medical systems, and it's kind of run by Adventists all on its own. Is that how you were, or you were kind of just out in the middle of nowhere practicing?
With Adventism, it has some very severe differences in class. So if you were on the lower income spectrum with Adventism, then you didn't necessarily have access to, and you were not considered in as high regard. So my family, like, when I was a kid versus up until my dad became a pastor, we were lower income. So we couldn't afford to be fully vegetarian and vegan. We couldn't necessarily afford the really expensive dietary replacement things that Adventism sells to people. Adventism is all about being in the world, but not of it. So if you are lower income in Adventism, you can't necessarily afford to be as insulated as everybody else is. But Adventism does have its own, like, it does come down to money a lot of the times. Where you end up is a reflection of education and how much income your family has and things like that. So Adventism has little spots of the people who have the most wealth versus the people who are lower income, but also sort of went off the deep end. So people who are further out, they literally have fled to the mountains. They live out there. They're doomsday prepping, versus the people who are closer to, especially their universities. There are like little bubbles of people who congregate around their universities. So if you look at Loma Linda, if you look at Walla Walla, there's just whole pockets of Adventist communities where everything revolves around the culture of Adventism there. You've got bubbles, and then you've got the middle ground of people who have to still interact with the rest of the world versus people who just went off into nowhere.
Okay. It's funny because it also sounds like Mormonism, and I know they popped up around the same time, but it's an apocalyptic church, but now the mainstream church is trying to look not super weird, and they're trying to even kind of be able to look like they're evangelical in ways, like they're starting to catfish people with their missionary work, and I've seen stories on social media of people who filled out forms to go to a worship, which we never called it worship, and then have no idea what they're signing up for until missionaries call them and they're like, wait, this is Mormonism? So they're doing their best to also try to get rid of their weird past and their weird history, and just look what most people would see as normal Christians. But in any case, the reason I'm bringing this up is because in the same way that you're speaking about it, Mormonism can have a huge variety of how people practice it, how intense it is. If the doomsday preppers people totally exist in Mormonism, and then you have those that are just like, yeah, I go to church on Sundays, drink a beer every now and then, don't take it too seriously. And I've mentioned this because in Melissa's video, it was interesting how a lot of people in the comments were like, well, I've never heard of that. That must not be true. Or like, we could use spices. I don't know what you're talking about. Makeup has never really been my thing. I don't have the time, the energy, or the skills to use a million different products, which is why I absolutely love Jones Road Beauty, the sponsor for today's video. This is their 3-color Miracle Balm palette, which really enhances my skin without feeling caked on. The best part is you don't need a brush. Just use your finger, apply it to your cheeks like I did here, or your lips, and you're good to go. It really gives you that natural dewy glow in less time. I love keeping this in my purse when I'm on the go and need a little touch up, or keeping it right here in the studio in between recordings. The best part though is Jones Road Beauty is packed with amazing, skin-loving, nourishing ingredients, leaving your skin looking natural and feeling amazing, and also smells really good too. None of those pesky chemicals, because clean beauty is a no-brainer. They actually have a whole lineup of effortless staples like their Just Enough tinted moisturizer that you can check out too. It's modern-day makeup that's clean, strategic, and multifunctional for an effortless routine. For a limited time, our listeners are going to get a free cool gloss with their first purchase if you use the code CULTFREE at checkout. So just go to jonesroadbeauty.com, use the code CULTFREE, and when they ask you who sent you, please support our show and tell them it was C2C. Thank you so much, guys. Back to our guest. It is interesting to see how different people practice it around the world, even, not even just in the States or Canada.
Yeah, when I was looking into Adventism, I went to what's called the Adventist Book Center, and I was picking up their material that they give to new pastors. And one of the bits of information I came across was about how to specifically target low-income people of color.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. They were basically like, there's a lot of money to be had if you can target these low-income communities. And so there is a stark difference between white Adventism and people of color who they've targeted, because they will essentially make concessions. Adventists don't like drums. They don't like spices. Like my family that's actually been higher up in Adventism, they don't use spices. Like what they'll serve, if you go and eat breakfast with them, what they'll serve you is a bowl of plain muesli with flaxseed on it and almond milk. That's what they'll feed you. Like when you look at pure Adventism, they won't say this to your face, but they do believe that they are above everybody else. And so when I see people making comments about like, well, it wasn't like that for me, I'm like, I'm sorry to have to break this to you, but you were the lower scale to the rest of Adventism. To them, they have a superiority complex. The less alcohol, the less caffeine, the less spices, the more modestly you dress, the higher up you are on the status symbol. And a lot of people don't actually understand that the people with the most money who are living this way at the top look down at everyone below they're basically farming for tithe money. Like that's kind of the sad thing to me, is a lot of people don't understand is like the Adventist church treats them like cattle. They are being farmed for their tithe money, for their volunteer hours. So when people are like, well, it wasn't that extreme for me, I'm like, that's because you were not in power. Like, you were a church member, as long as like you were participating in some way, but you are a tool for these people to perceive themselves as superior with. That's what the whole thing's about. It's about superiority. So if you were using more spices, if you were cooking with chicken, you cooked with cheese, if you drank coffee. Like, I remember as a kid, like this one guy came to church with a cup of Tim Hortons. You would have thought that he murdered somebody. It could be that extreme. And so when people are like, well, yeah, we live this way, the unfortunate reality is if other church members saw you living this way, they were looking down on you and internally, without telling you, perceiving themselves as better than you because you weren't as good as an Adventist as they are.
Yeah.
Where those differences come from is that inherent superiority complex that's baked into high demand religions.
Yeah. And all great points. And also, why can't you have cheese?
So Adventism has a very special founding member. That is Dr. John Harvey Kellogg of the Kellogg cereal empire.
Right.
And he was a very special case. His whole thing, like back at the time, this wasn't just Adventism, but Adventism was definitely leading the charge on this, was that sex, orgasms, spice, coffee, and dairy, all of these things cut your lifespan short. And anything that cuts your lifespan short is not of God.
Sex cuts your lifespan short?
Yes. So when you ask yourself why was Kellogg so obsessed with making sure that kids don't touch themselves, it's because the theory was, like, this man literally would not have sex with his wife. Like, that was a sex-free marriage. Which is kind of weird because this man created a device that to decrease a woman's sex drive, he would pump about 4 gallons of almost boiling hot water up a woman, which, I mean, It works. Nobody wants to do anything after that's happened to you, but he would use that same device on himself, but with yogurt. So the foundation of Adventism,
What?
and when you the basis of actually purity culture, not just for Adventism, Kellogg's weird nonsense went through Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness. It went into general medical stuff. Like, he's a circumcision guy. And so when I look at purity culture as an ex-Adventist, and I look at the way that people interact with purity culture, I'm like, you guys, this is the yogurt up his butt guy. You got your perspectives on purity from the guy who put yogurt up his butt for his health. You deserve better than yogurt up your butt guy. Please ground your perspectives in something else.
Yeah, I did not know that about him. I mentioned this in Melissa's video. The only thing I remember hearing was that he created the super bland cereal because he thought that eating bland stuff would not make you want to masturbate. And I was like, what?
Yes, because he believed masturbating would cut your lifespan short. That was the theology at the time. So Adventists believe that the closest to God you can get really is extreme veganism. Like, that's the peak. That's what you're supposed to hit, is that point. So anything in regards to that's why they're so hardcore about cooking. It's why they're so intense about wine and coffee and premarital sex and all of this stuff, is that it leads back to decades old superstition about what does or does not cut your lifespan short.
Mm-hmm.
Which now, like, if you look at it now, you're just like, well, that's unhinged.
Well, but also,
sure.
Why would it matter if your lifespan was cut short in an apocalyptic church where the world is supposed to end any day anyway?
Well, I think that's like what doesn't make a lot of sense is that, like, for myself growing up in Adventism, I was always wondering why on earth my parents even had kids. I was like, you guys believe that we're going to be hunted down by the government. You guys think that the government's going to make worshiping Saturday illegal, and we're going to be hunted down and murdered for our beliefs. Why am I here? I feel like there are ethical problems with you bringing me into this situation. But they're like, no, you need to keep having kids and you need to live as long as possible in order for salvation and things like that. So the earliest I can actually remember having issues with mental health and things like that, I was about 5 or so. And my grandparents lived on a farm out in the prairies. And we had just listened to a very apocalyptic sermon about how God was coming. And I was being told, I'm sitting there like as a kid being told my mom's going to be to death in front of me for Jesus. And I need to be okay with that. So the next day, I'm sitting there on the lawn. My grandfather is driving past with a tractor. And I'm sitting there freaking out. And I was like, I can't do it. I'm actually not good with this. I don't think I can handle all of these plagues that are supposed to happen. I can't handle seeing my family being killed in front of me. I can't handle being to death or put in jail myself. I can't handle being shot for Jesus. This isn't working for me. I'm 5. So I was looking at the tractor as my grandfather's driving past, and I stood up and I actually got into position and I was going to run under the tractor because I was like, I can't do this. If this is what's coming, I can't do this. And I start running at the tractor to try to get under it before my grandfather sees me. And then I only stopped because I had the thought, what if Jesus thinks that this is cheating? If I cut my life short at 5, what if Jesus says, no, you tried to just end it. You tried to skip everything and get into heaven just by dying now. What if you still don't get salvation? And so I stopped because I'm 5 years old at this quandary. Is this cheating salvation or not? And I look back at that as an adult and I'm like, 5-year-olds should not be having this kind of debate with themselves. This doesn't seem healthy for a child to be dealing with.
No, not at all. That was my first thought was no 5-year-old should be stuck with this existential crisis or very real threat of seeing your parents murdered in front of you. That's horrible. At 5, you're really contemplating your own life. And that just shows you how dangerous it is to be teaching this to children. It doesn't make any sense to me, these types of extremist religious views being put onto children. If you're an adult and you want to believe that, go for it. That's all you. But we don't even let children watch PG-13 movies or R-rated movies. Why would we tell them something that's not even imaginary in their minds and tell them that it's actually going to happen? It's abusive in my perspective.
Oh, I absolutely agree. One of the reasons I ethically cannot support Adventism and Adventist theology being shown to kids is I took a class on, because my background is in psychology, and I took a class on cognitive development for kids. And after I got the information on how a human brain develops, I was like, it is abuse. It 100% is abuse to expose a developing brain at this stage to extremely alarming and terrifying imagery and messaging. So my parents are out here being like, you can't watch Harry Potter, but we are going to make you watch Doug Batchelor's series of Final Events DVDs, which depict humans being crushed quite graphically by boulders from the sky and breaking out in boils, and basically they show this whole series. It's early CGI, so it's terrible to watch. It's very cheesy, but you're a kid, so you're being shown very graphic depictions of what Adventists believe the end of the world's going to look like. And so I was having nightmares about the end of the world based on Doug Batchelor's series, because he was a top Adventist preacher for a very long time through their because Adventists have what's called 3ABN. It's their satellite streaming service. They literally have you can have your own TV. It's not just their universities, their school systems, and their hospitals. It's also their own TV. You can isolate your whole life down to this ideology.
Wow. So is that something that you remember exclusively watching? Were you allowed to watch any other types of TV?
It was extremely limited. We were still allowed things like Lord of the Rings here and there, Narnia, stuff like that. Like I said, my parents, at least when I was a kid into my early teens, they were more on the liberal side of things. I would see my dad play video games before he became a pastor and stuff like that. But to this day, like I'll be Twitch streaming and people in my chat will bring up references to different movies or music bands, and I'll have it's now an inside joke in my community is Rosie's not going to get it. I have no idea what you're talking about. I missed it completely. Like most music, most movies, things like that. My parents did not like Disney because Disney tells you to follow your heart, and the Bible says don't follow your heart. I had Mr. Dress Up, like the Canadian kids programming and stuff like that. We still
It's like, what's that?
yeah. So think like the Canadian version of Mr. Rogers.
Okay.
Yeah. We had some
geez.
things would filter through, but for the most part, it was hymns, it was Veggie Tales, it was the Threebian satellites. Yeah,
Okay.
bubbled life.
Do you have any other childhood memories that you want to talk about before we get into the switch of your dad becoming a pastor?
What really sticks out to me from childhood, aside from just how much I hated Saturdays in general, because your life is locked down, you can't do anything fun, that's the holy day, is that everything came down to you don't have autonomy over your own life. And there was one Saturday where after church, we were all brought to this one congregation member's house, and it was a bunch of families with kids specifically. And after lunch, we were each individually brought into the living room where all the adults were in a prayer circle in the living room. And you, one by one, would be called in, told to kneel on the floor. And then all of these adults standing over you would put their hands on you to like pray over you and do like spiritual prayer, warrior blessings over your life. It's really creepy. And I walked into the room and I had such like a vivid internal reaction in my gut of, this is weird. This is not a normal, healthy thing for grown-ups to do. Why am I, a kid, the only one recognizing that a bunch of adults standing in a room putting their hands on somebody is not normal? And I stopped and I was like, I'm not comfortable with this. I remember looking at my dad and saying very directly, I don't want to do this. I'm not comfortable with this. And my dad did this whole thing of, you're going to do it anyway. This is good for you. I know what's best for you. And it kind of like, it set this precedent of like, you don't get to say, you don't actually know. And that's a core basis of Adventist theology, is death to self. You're not supposed to really have an identity. It's like Star Trek's Borg, you will be assimilated. I'm kneeling there, and then all these adults are putting their hands on me and praying over me, and I was just feeling nauseous. And they finally finish. I get up, and my dad looks at me, and he was like, well, that wasn't so bad, was it? And I look back at him, and I said, yes, it was, actually. I did not like that, and I left. That's the messaging, though, is that you don't know what's best for you. You don't get to decide. You are God's sheep. God knows what's best, and the men of the household under God's headship know what's best for you. You're supposed to appreciate it. If you feel uncomfortable, squish it. These people know what's best for you. You suck it up and say thank you, right? So that's kind of like what I remember of Adventism, is that attitude of, you don't know what's best for you. You're not in charge. Even though you're a person with a prefrontal cortex, you don't get to say what's actually in your best interest.
That gave me a visceral reaction, and I can't put a finger on the memory, but I know something like that happened to me in Mormonism. I could just feel it. It doesn't matter if you're uncomfortable, because you even voice that opinion, which is a big deal for a child to do. And then being forced to do it anyway, like your autonomy doesn't matter. And then the knife in it, what really got me was, that wasn't so bad, was it? Where, again, it's like being re-victimized, where they're like, the abuse wasn't that bad. You're the problem. I'm not the problem, when they're the one that made you do it. Oh, it just makes me sick. I hate that. And yeah, that's no healthy place for a child. Obviously, children need boundaries, but if a
Hmm.
child is saying to you, "I don't feel comfortable with this," you need to listen. You need to actually hear them out because just like you said, you're going to crush this idea that they should listen to their body or listen to their instincts in any way, which can be really
Hmm.
dangerous later on.
Well, yeah, because a lot of religious trauma for people comes down to realizing you now literally have to deal with cognitive delay. They've done things, and this can be like my own psychology special interest moment, but when you look at I believe it's Jean Piaget who said that children are like little scientists. Their brain develops by literally interacting with the world. And when you grow up in a bubble that specifically prevents you from interacting with the world, like you are constantly being told, don't touch this, don't touch that, and that goes back to like Bill Gothard. He was also connected with Adventism. You'll grow up and find out that there are huge gaps in your own neurological framework that your church and family community put there on purpose. Like they hobbled your brain intentionally. And so you are struggling in adulthood because the framework that you were supposed to develop as a child isn't there. And you've got people in their late 20s, 30s, even 40s having to, on their own, develop the neurons that they were supposed to back here because these churches, these evangelical high demand organizations, stunt you on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into what it was like when your dad transitioned into a pastor, how that affected your life.
My dad had been working in the oil field industry, IT, for Alberta, and Alberta was hit very hard during that 2008 crash. He lost his job and he ended up taking up lay pastor type of work. And it was around the time where he was starting to step into being a pastor, being a performer. And that's the thing with my dad, like charismatic, ADHD, like born to perform type of thing. It was during one of his sermons where my mom and my brother were at home. My mom was chronically ill, so this it wasn't uncommon for her to stay back. My dad started sharing a story about me to this whole congregation that I had never heard before. So I'm sitting there alone in this pew while my dad describes me at around 3 years old. And he's telling the congregation that I was having serious nightmares, like the kind of nightmares where you start thrashing about, you're making noise. And he decides, as head of the home, that my nightmares are the result of demonic harassment. At 3 years old, apparently demons are coming in, and now I'm thrashing and having nightmares and etc. So in this story, he goes into the room, does the laying of hands thing, and then prayer warriors the demons out of me. And in his story, apparently he casts the demons out in Jesus' name, and I come 3 feet off the bed, according to him. So I'm sitting there, everybody's heads are turning towards me, and suddenly, for the sake of my dad's platform, I'm now the freak who needed to be exorcised. And I can't describe the level of violated I felt at that moment. Like I had this
Yeah.
whole sense of my dad just used me as a tool to prop himself up as this spiritual warrior to his audience.
Yeah.
And that became this moment of this might not be real. What just happened? And it was a violation of privacy. It was that sense of being exploited, and it felt embarrassing. Like you're a kid, and that's a universal experience for pastors' kids in general, is that you'll often find pastors' kids struggling with their mental health, struggling with suicidal ideation, struggling with all of this heavy stuff because they are a tool for advertisement. They are not necessarily a person, they are a product for their parents to prop themselves up with and sell an ideology to an emotionally vulnerable audience. So my memories of like my dad stepping into being a pastor are one in which I would watch him be very performative. I would see this person on stage, but know a different person at home. There's one sermon in particular he was very fond of. I caught it. I realized that was like the exact moment I realized this wasn't real. Was he'll tell a story about this one couple very much in love, where the guy is in the army. He does something that gets him put in front of the firing squad, And he's told that when the bell rings at a certain time, that's when he'll be executed. And his fiance, who loves him so very much, goes up into the bell tower, wraps her arms around the bell. And then as it's being rung, it's her body like in the bell. It's a very visceral, graphic type of story where her love, Jesus on the cross, basically saves her fiance because the bell doesn't ring. She climbs out of the tower, goes to the firing squad, battered and bloody. And the guy is so moved, the person in charge of executing her fiance is so moved by her love that he's like, you're free to go, live your best life. And the first time I heard this story, I was like, oh my gosh, it's so touching. That's intense. God's love must be so amazing. And then I heard it a second time, and I realized my dad was crying at the same points in the story. And I heard it a third time, and I realized this was a rehearsed performance. And by the sixth time that I'd heard my dad give the story, I was like, how impactful and real is this story if you are literally delivering it the exact same way every time, crying on cue? And like, when I say crying, like, it would be this intense emotional thing that would go on and off. And I was like, this is a little suspicious. Do you actually believe in this, or is this just fun to perform?
Yeah. Did you ever confront him about using that story of you, which you suspiciously never heard until that moment? I feel like if that had actually happened, you wouldn't have heard the end of that growing up.
You would have think so, but no, it was actually just slid into that sermon out of nowhere. And I didn't confront him on that specific story. Later, as I got older, I was in my late teens and then into my early 20s, I started specifically asking my dad to stop using me in sermons. I gave him very specific, this makes me uncomfortable. I don't want you to do this anymore. And it was not treated seriously. It kept on going. And to the point where after I cut contact, a friend reached out to me and they were like, Rosie, have you seen the last sermon that your dad posted? Because
Oh, no.
like Adventists put their sermons out there on the internet too. So I went and I looked it up, and there is a sermon with photos of me with my dad. And he's basically completely negated the part where I'm not Adventist anymore. I don't have a relationship with them, like completely and utterly misrepresenting me. And I had to report the sermon to YouTube to have it taken down. I had to report it twice because they re-uploaded it. But like I said, the experience for myself with Adventism is, I don't care if you're uncomfortable. I'm going to do about you whatever I want to. And any discomfort you have is your own fault. You're deciding to be uncomfortable, but I, as the man of the household, have decided this is how I want to operate and this is what's best. So like at no point have I ever felt like my discomfort, my privacy, or anything like that was ever respected.
Yeah.
In that regard.
You mentioned Bill Gothard. We've covered IBLP quite a bit on this channel. Did that seep in and create the umbrella of authority situation?
Yes, Adventists have the that same umbrella of like Christ, man, wife, kids, and then the other set of umbrellas that's like Satan, wife, husband, kids. It's one of those things where you look at it where you're just like, wow, women having any kind of voice equals Satan. That's insane. But Bill Gothard had influence with the Adventist Church. From what I understand, they would do their own stuff at Loma Linda, which is one of the top Adventist universities. They give lectures. I grew up also with Focus on the Family. There was a lot of exposure to things like Adventures in Odyssey, and the idea that you could essentially break a kid. Kids who are strong-willed need to be broken was a pretty big influence in my own childhood. My family and like Adventism in general, I've noticed this after studying like basics of psychology, is that these high demand organizations, Adventism, Mormonism, FLDS, like they are locked in on behavior modification. They cannot let it go. Psychology left that behind a long time ago, but these organizations are so reliant on punishment and reward model reward models that are inherently unethical and can really cause some serious psychological damage to someone's brain and development. But it goes back to that whole train up a child in the way that they should go. And behavior modification believed at the time, the theory was you can train, if you get a brain young enough, you can train it to be anything you want, which we know is not correct. Like you actually, even with animals at the end of the day, no matter how much training you put into them, they'll still do what they want to do because they also have a sense of autonomy. Humans have autonomy, but if you apply very consistent and rigorous punishment models to them and reward models, then you will influence to some degree where they turn out, what happens in their life, how their brain develops, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, it's like you can impair a child, but you can't control their basic instincts and their basic biology. So as much as we want, like, yes, you can harm the system, but you can't change the system because it is what it is.
Yeah, essentially, like as somebody a woman who's been very visible on the internet for the past few years, you most commonly get hit with fatherless behavior. They like to just like use that bonking stick of fatherless behavior because these conservative people believe that a good father will have full control over your brain and behavior. You won't turn out this way because your father had this control over you and trained you right. But the reality is, like, it didn't matter how well I was trained as a kid. I got some very intense conservative training throughout my childhood into my teen years, and I still turned out the way I did. And I am where I am now because I am an autonomous adult. I have my own brain. I am my own person. I decide what is best for me.
Mhm.
And this is something that they can't seem to get through their heads, is that, especially as a woman, you do still have your own it doesn't matter the training. I have my own prefrontal cortex.
Mhm.
I can decide.
Let's talk about your mom. Do you remember what she was like growing up and maybe before she got sick? Do you feel like she had to be that submissive woman to your dad?
Absolutely. The headship in the home ideology was very strong with my family. And unfortunately for my mom, there are a few factors. She never got diagnosed, but it does seem as though autism runs very strongly in her side of the family. She wrote a lot of journals, and I would find them growing because I was typically the one who was responsible for cleaning up the house and stuff. And so I'd find these notebooks lying around, and I would open them up and be like, what is this? What? So I could put it back where it's supposed to be. And she would write about how she felt like a man in a woman's body and that she was attracted to women. That this was kind of like the family shame. Part of what made my mom a black sheep is that she struggled with a queer identity. So a lot of pressure. I saw so much pressure being put on her to conform to very strict ideals of what it means to be a woman. But my mom loved like being outside, horseback riding, farmyard work. Like she was a very outdoor type of person. Like she was very much more oriented towards stereotypical guy interests. Adventism is one of the first organizations to fund conversion therapy. My dad is very like intensely of the opinion that being gay is something that you like, it's a feeling and it's like a mental disorder that stems from the sin of not controlling your feelings. So my mom was under a lot of pressure. Not to be other than a good submissive wife. She was also very talented in regards to the piano. When it came to math, when it came to music, she was incredibly talented. Like this woman, there was something special that was there. And usually when you sit in a church, you're listening to the hymns and whatnot, you kind of nod off. It's very generic music. When my mom played, something shifted. Like you could feel it at the base of the church, like going right up through the foundation. When she played, something powerful would happen where you would feel energy just like lift up through the whole building. Something that was like really hard to watch is that in our family, like I consider myself like with my platform, with everything I've done over the past few years, like charismatic, attractive, smart, blah, blah, blah. But the person in our family who actually should have been at the forefront was my mom. When she played, It was something so profoundly powerful, and it got put on the back burner to my dad's sermons. She was just basically the decoration to his platform. And that was something that really stuck with me. As I would watch my family, like I would perform and sing and be part of worship service and stuff as a pastor's kid, as would my younger sibling. My dad would do the sermon, and I would watch my mom play, and I would notice the difference. Like my dad is going off on his sermon, but I'm watching my mom play, and there was a magic there that was just not being given the same attention, not being given the same recognition. She's just the pastor's wife who's playing as decoration.
Mm-hmm.
And to uplift him. And unfortunately, was very chronically ill. And the story in I was given a variety of stories about her, like essentially that she was choosing to be sick.
What?
However, yeah, I did a few years in disability care as well. So what really deconstructed what was going on with her for me was doing disability care and then contrasting it with how I watched her be treated throughout like the time that I knew her. And I was like, she was showing a lot of symptoms of like CPTSD, things like that. And people kept trying to be like, no, she's paranoid. She's probably schizophrenic. She's this, that, and the other. But at a baseline, what I remember at my core about her was never really believe your mom. She doesn't know her own reality. She doesn't know what she's really talking about. She's just choosing not to get better. The implication was she was never really right with God. So I'm watching her struggle with her queer identity, with her health. I was told that there have been assaults, but never really details. Like as in she had experienced assault from people in childhood, and also apparently at the Adventist university that I also attended later. However, it was made to be her shame. Apparently, the last one in particular, while at the university, it was portrayed, because that's about the time she met my dad, it was portrayed as an affair, but she was a student. And the person who she had an affair with was a faculty member's spouse. So I'm like, that's not... She's a kid still. She was at the high school and then the university that's all on the same campus. So I'm like, that's an unequal power exchange. This is a student with prior trauma being groomed and taken advantage of by a faculty member's person who should not have access to students.
Yeah.
And so she's carrying all the symptoms of trauma, possibly neurodivergence, and then also queer identity within Adventism. It was absolutely brutal to watch because over time you could see her disappearing as a person. Her skin became very shallow, hair was falling out. She was throwing up all the time, so her teeth were falling out. It was absolutely brutal to watch. And so I'm there being like, if nothing's wrong with her, why are her teeth falling out? If this is in her head, why is she... Literally, I would have to unlock her hands in the morning. Like she'd wake up and she had early onset arthritis, so her hands are like this, and I'm having to physically unlock her hands while people are being like, she's choosing to be this way. This is her own fault. She's just not praying enough. She's not right with God enough. She's choosing to be a victim. And I was like, I feel like nobody chooses this. And that was something that like sat in the back of my head. And it's why I went on for psychology courses and counseling courses. I was like, well, maybe if I get these tools and this understanding, I can show up as an advocate and support for her. And maybe we can actually catch what is happening in this process, because she was literally wasting away in front of us.
Something that I'm trying to put together is if they have their own hospitals, but then at the same time they just believe in faith healing, how do they not conflict? Because it seems like if you have doctors who are actually trained in health, they would understand that she's not doing this on purpose.
With her, in Canada, you have less access to Adventist-specific hospitals and things like that. It's very centralized. That aspect of Adventism is more in the States. Basically, my mom was treated like it was inconvenient for everybody. Like we would go to regular hospitals and things like that, but we would have nurses in the family where they develop a cognitive dissonance. They'll work in the medical field. They'll get all of this training, but they don't seem to get that what they've been trained in doesn't actually conform to this. So Adventists will have like this weird dissonance of, I'll still access medical care, but also faith healing is a thing. And I know of one pastor who actually did pass away because he decided that the prayers of his congregation would save him from cancer. They did not. He should have actually had the medical treatment, but it really just depends. Like I said, it depends on your geographic location, and it'll depend on class, right? So somebody who's lower income out in Canada is more likely to access regular medical services versus somebody who's higher up in Adventism around Loma Linda. They're going to go to those services. And ideally, if you're Adventist, you want to have money and you want to be around Loma Linda or Walla Walla.
I guess it's just super terrifying for me to think that there are doctors and nurses practicing out there in the world who may not be giving their patients the care that they need because of this belief system.
I would watch the nurses in my family, like even because on my mom's side, they have a sibling who works in the medical field. And when she passed, they did not actually, the only person in my family who was looking closely at what happened to my mom was me. And that just did not sit right with me at all, where I was just like, you have far more advanced medical training than I do. You should be with your full chest yelling about this situation. Like, you should actually be looking at this. But to actually look at what happened to my mom would mean that you would have to question the whole headship in the home ideology. You would have to look closely at this stuff, which could pull the whole thing apart. So even if somebody is working in the medical field, they will have blind spots where they don't look too closely and they don't approach it if it means that it'll start pulling the threads of their belief system down.
Jeez, what about your dad's reaction to this? I mean, he's watching his wife wither away and he's just not doing anything about it.
The way that my mom was living was one in which, especially at the end there, she spent most of her life in bed in the dark. It was very depressing. And when she did pass away, the whole thing was weird. I got a call, like this was my last year of university, and I got a call just from my dad sobbing that my mom had died. And like, we'd been told that she was probably going to die young for a long time. Like, we'd been told this would be happening. And I was told that she accidentally suffocated. And I was like, I know she's ill, but she's not a paraplegic. Like, she's still ambulatory. And I was told that she fell asleep on her face and her pain medications did not cause her to roll over and that she suffocated. And I was like, well, your central nervous system should still turn you over. And I talked to a few other medical professionals and they're like, yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I flew back home the same day that I was told that she passed away. All of her journals were in a garbage bag being hauled out the door before I could get to them. As soon as I got home, the entire week, there was no emotional distress about my mom passing, like none whatsoever. Everything, it was like nothing had happened up until my mom's family arrived. And that's when the tears started and like the grieving and stuff. But during the week, it was just myself, my dad, and my sibling. It was as if nothing had actually happened. And I was kind of treated as the weird one for having any kind of grief reaction. As a lot of people were treating it as a relief, as if like her passing was like, oh, finally, like we're done dealing with this person. And then I was introduced to the person who's now my stepmom about 4 months after my mom passed. The whole situation going on there was that essentially my mom was useful for a time until she wasn't. And then when I accessed her autopsy, it was overdose. She had 10 times the lethal amount of fentanyl in her system. So nobody had been honest with me about how she passed. It was made to be out to be like some kind of like accident where she rolled over, when no, you don't accidentally end up with 10 times that amount. And so when it came to like how I was watching people react to this, it was like nobody's actually being straight up and honest with me. Things are moving on with other people like within under 6 months of my mom passing, and her death is being treated as a relief. So overall, like that's about the time where I had an unrepairable fracture with Adventism, because I was sitting there at her funeral and it wasn't her friends there. Her family was there, but most of the people who showed up for her funeral were the Adventist conference. It was pastors and conference leaders showing up for my dad. And the whole thing was a sermon by a pastor my mom didn't even like, about like the whole moving on, Jesus will return, summon her from the grave type of stuff. And I'm sitting there. I didn't even actually speak at my mom's funeral because I had such like an intense sense of something's wrong. And so I'm listening to like this Adventist music, this Adventist rhetoric about like what happens after you die and things like that. And I'm sitting there watching this whole performance happen, but something is so intensely wrong with the situation. The truth of what actually happened is not being portrayed. Everything is being made to look shiny. It's like that Duggar thing, right? Like shiny, happy people, but around somebody's passing, something as heavy as that. And so the way that I saw not just my dad, but everyone else reacting was performative. It was, we had an unfortunate accident in the family, and we'll see her again someday. Moving on.
I'm so sorry that happened. I can't imagine the feelings that you must have been going through, knowing in your gut that something is wrong and just seeing that reaction from people, especially your own dad and him moving on. All of that it's so heartbreaking that she wasn't given that love and respect that she deserved. And it seems to be the evidence is that someone offed her on purpose. Was there anything that you could have done? I mean, it's never on the person who it happened to, the victim, the survivor, which I feel like is you in this case, to report something as when it's happening, it's traumatic. But were you able to talk to anyone about this, like law enforcement, of, hey, something's off, like this never should have happened?
The struggle with that is I kind of put two and two together a couple years after she passed.
Okay.
I was at the funeral and I left the building feeling like this internal like fracturing happening. But at the same time, looking at the situation, you still want to trust people. You still, like, you don't want to look at the worst of the worst scenarios. About a year later, I got married. That experience where I married back into Adventism, even though I was moving away myself, I didn't believe it, didn't practice it, I married back into it. And that experience in and of itself was so dark and so just messed up that around the time I started looking at splitting from that relationship, I was like, something's wrong here in how I'm being treated in my own marriage. I think something was also wrong. Like the sense of wrongness from how my mom passed never went away. And that's when I decided to request the autopsy report. And I found out that like the cause of death was actually fentanyl. And I was like, well, if what happened to my mom was in her head and she never got a concrete diagnosis, why was she being prescribed fentanyl? You don't give fentanyl to somebody it's just in their head. That doesn't make any sense. So for her to be prescribed something that heavy, that meant something was wrong. However, how I survived, like the situation where I left the relationship and cut off family and everything, that was during the pandemic. I made a full break for it. And I never really had a social media presence before, but I started with TikTok trying to frantically grow as much of a following as possible, because what happened to my mom freaked me out. I was being told that my ex was what was standing in between me and basically disappearing into conversion therapy. I was just so on edge at the time. So here I am trying to build a social media following because I was like, well, maybe somebody will miss me if I'm gone. And I told friends, I gave them a folder of a bunch of stuff. And I was like, if you don't see me post in 72 hours, I want you guys to like release this so people know if I've disappeared, then this is probably what's happened. 2020 was a very scary time for me. So I just found out like my mom had not suffocated. I'm now trying to make a break for it completely from Adventism, from my family, my ex's family and my ex. And that was about the time where I was like super vulnerable. Like I went broke to do this. I went hungry, like food insecure for about 6 months. So when it came down to like actually confronting what happened with my mom, I have to be very careful in regards to like what can come back on me, because now it's been a few years. Anything law enforcement can find is now way in the past. There's also a chance that she did it herself, because her whole thing was, because my mom did have ideation throughout my life, and she would say, if I'm gone, you guys can have a better mom and your dad will have a better wife. Like she had this belief that she was in our way. All of these different factors playing in, where I don't have money, I don't have power, I'm vulnerable. And then also with her journals, like I said, all of her journals have been taken and thrown out. My mom always used to say that no one was listening to her while she was alive. No one would listen to her voice. And so what she would say to me is, if I write it out after I pass, people will read it and understand. They'll understand me. When I flew home a couple hours after she passed, all of her journals are in a bag, and I'm being told she had delusions of being abused, and I don't want the police to find this and think that something was wrong. And then it was all hauled out right in front of me. I had no chance to get hold of any of it. So any of that, anything that could be for her is now like was entirely removed. And so any of her legacy for us, her words, her voice were entirely moved out to the garbage within hours of her passing. So we don't even really have anything to operate on, except for a harsh reality of there's now a hole where she used to be, and everybody's like, well, that's too bad, except for me.
Oh my gosh. Is there any sort of ideology or theology around suicide, to where if it were your mom doing that herself, that your dad would want to hide that?
Oh, absolutely. Like that would be the whole point of being the pastor's family, is you are a living commercial. If the kids or the wife are suffering in some way, then that detracts from what you're selling. Because the whole point of what Adventists are selling to people is, through God and the Adventist lifestyle, you will be relieved of depression. You will be relieved of anxiety. God will bless you by giving you relief from shame, from guilt, all of this stuff that we struggle to regulate as humans. Adventism is the solution, right? If the pastor's wife takes her own life, then that is a very clear indicator to everyone that maybe what's being sold isn't actually the product that it's been made out to be. Where it's like, oh, if this is so healthy, if this is so good for you, why is she gone?
Yeah.
And so for it to be presented as an accident where she's ill and she accidentally suffocated, then that gives plausible deniability, where you can be like, oh, that's so tragic, but God steps in, God helps, God heals. Moving on. Like very much the attitude is, oh, that's so tragic, but God heals. Moving on.
Yeah, and we see that in other groups too. That's how it is in Mormonism. And I've had friends whose siblings have passed, or parents, and they feel like they didn't ever get the chance to grieve because no one around them was grieving. And it's just this idea of, well, they're in heaven now, and when you die, you'll go to be with them. So don't be sad. I mean, as a psychology major, that's a really dangerous place to be, because you need to grieve. You need to get that out. It's just going to fester and cause problems later.
Oh, definitely. Because the harmful messaging really is that if you're suffering, it's because you're not connected to God. You have to push and push and push, where essentially if you feel hard emotions, if you feel grief, you feel sadness, anger, and all of this stuff, well, God is supposed to be your relief for that. And if you're going a different route, like if you go to therapy, for example, and you're given tools for self-regulation, but in Adventism, self-regulation is supposed to happen through God. And so for a lot of people, you end up suffering quietly for many years because that's not a real tool. Like part of the reason I deconstructed was in that process of grief and whatnot. I was like, prayer isn't doing anything. All of these emotions that I'm feeling, praying about it, God, these are not concrete tools that have any real long-term impact for me. I just keep ending up in the same place without any progress, back on my knees, sobbing to God. And I was like, well, if God is actually so effective, if prayer and all of this stuff in Adventism is so good for you, why am I on my knees over and over and over, bawling my eyes out? Versus if I go to therapy, if I get an education in how my brain works, I don't end up completely crashing out over and over again. I feel like I'm making progress. I feel like I'm healing. I feel like I'm processing. So if you contrast this over here, where you are in a perpetual cycle of hitting the same hard place over and over again versus stepping out of theology into actual evidence research-based tools, you'll see a very profound difference in where your life goes and in your own mental health and sense of self.
Yeah. So before we get into how you're doing now after deconstructing, there was one piece that I think we were going to touch on, which is how you were being spied on in a relationship because you were 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Oh yeah. So my ex and I, we ended up moving out to the same city as their parents. They had, like, as most of these types of churches do, you've got, this is a funny thing to me, is that in that whole headship of the home and the church, these men are cosplaying. The whole thing is these grown men cosplaying leaders and wisdom and leadership. And they do this by setting themselves up like spiders over your life. And they have to monitor things and get their fingers in stuff. And at the end of the day, though, it's like their own, like, you come to realize that these men who you are raised to look up to actually are not that competent or smart. They're not really that with it. They didn't actually pursue a real education. They took some classes on a language that they don't even use in their real life. They took theology stuff, maybe a class or two in behavior modification, but they're not necessarily the smartest people or competent people. They really just want you to think that through God, they're so wise and smart. So they'll do things like, what was it? The youth pastor had somebody basically reporting back on my ex and I, because I loved hosting. We would do game nights, movie nights, all of this stuff. And we're poor students at the time. We're still in university. And I would get like some cheap ciders, maybe some wine for cooking. And so to me, I'm like, this isn't really a big deal. Like, it's a 5% alcoholic beverage, whatever. But this girl would come through and she would interact with us, act as though she was a friend. And then apparently she would go back to the youth pastor and report on us. So according to her, I was an alcoholic. Because I had a $10 bottle of wine on my stove for cooking pasta with, or I would drink a cider during game nights. It's stuff that's very extreme over something that I was like, I love that you think I can afford to be an alcoholic, but no. Actually, that's not even remotely correct. But yeah, they would watch us and then report back that my ex was like some kind of adulterer at heart who intended to like get with every woman that he could, and I'm an alcoholic and blah blah blah. And so I'm listening back on this just like, I wish my life was this interesting, but actually no, I'm working as a PSW and I'm a part-time student. I promise it's not nearly as scandalous as it's being made out to be, but that's what they'll do, is that organizations like this, they'll do reconnaissance on you, especially if you are a fringe member, you're still connected in some way. They want to monitor you, and then they want to feel as though they're doing something. It's feeding back into that cosplay, because like that's what they're doing. They're cosplaying as social workers and therapists and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's actually just some weird guy who wants to cosplay as God's soldier. And so they'll monitor your life, bring back information, and pull the wildest and most inappropriate conclusions about you. And then they'll behave so weirdly around you. So in their mind, they've got this narrative that they're God's soldier and they're doing right by you and they know better than you, but you're watching them do this and you're like, wow, that's actually kind of neurotic. Like this isn't normal. And most of like my own deconstruction came from a place of like, this isn't actually healthy or normal things for an adult to do. Like maybe this isn't grounded in reality.
Yeah, and now you've made leaps and bounds. I think you had said when I reached out that it was the 10-year anniversary of your mother's passing, and so I'm glad we got to honor her today and talk about her today. And let's talk about how you're doing now.
So where I am today is I actually just finished a college program in the diploma that I have wanted since I was about 13. I am now a special effects makeup artist, as well as like full-time
Nice.
content creator and things like that. Because back in the day, when I was watching Lord of the Rings, I knew exactly what I wanted to do for a career. I was watching the Two Towers and seeing like all the really cool, the CGI effects, the prosthetics, like all of this stuff, the orcs and just all the detail that went into it. And at 13, I was like, I want to do that. Like it was a very solid internal sense of that's it. And I didn't pursue it because pastors' daughters and good Adventists and good Christians are not supposed to wear makeup.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and that was felt so normal to me. Like you're supposed to just easily sacrifice and give up things that are important to you. About the same time that I'm separating from my ex, I'm looking into what happened to my mom. There was a memory of my mom that popped up, and it was her going to thrift stores and antique shops, and she would come back with the most beautiful jewelry and accessories. And she would buy makeup and things like that. And so in her room, you'd find little collections of gorgeous jewelry, like feathered necklaces that were just like very like opulent, brooches, jewels, stuff like that. It was gorgeous, and she'd never wear it because pastors' wives aren't supposed to do that. So she'd never wear the makeup. She would never accessorize. She kept all of this stuff, and it would just sit there. And then she'd pull through it, she'd look through it, and then put it away. And I basically sat down with that memory of her, and I was like, I can't fix what happened. I don't really have the tools to really address what happened. All I have now is me completely on the outside. I think possibly one of the best ways to honor her is to wear the makeup, is to wear the jewelry. Like she and I shared a love for dressing up and wearing makeup and accessorizing and all this stuff. Like she loved this stuff. That's where I got it from. And I was like, you know what? Let's go for it. Let's give her. Like let's put everything into pursuing everything that I love, but I've been told I need to sacrifice for Jesus. My heart wants this, and I'm tired of giving it up for God. I'm tired of giving up what was integral to me and integral to my mom, integral to our identity. I'm tired of giving it up for the sake of a deity that never showed up for me. That led to me essentially working for the next several years, saved up, and I paid off a college tuition without a single loan on a special effects makeup diploma. A little piece that was missing just slotting into place and being like, okay, this is what being at peace with oneself actually looks like. What they say that Jesus is supposed to do for you internally, I just did for myself. I don't need theology. I don't need a connection to a deity I can't see to do this for me. I am fully capable of being my own peace.
Mm-hmm.
I can be my own regulation. I can be my own identity. I put that back together for myself.
Yeah. You found your authenticity and you owned it. You stepped into it. You leaned into it instead of crushing it.
Exactly. But basically doing the opposite, where I'm like, instead of repressing this, we're going to feed it. We're going to throw all of our energy at it and see what happens. And it's one of the best things I have ever done for myself, is choosing that thing that my brain and my heart wanted more than anything and being like, no, actually, I'm not going to die to self anymore.
Yeah.
No, nobody gets to take this from me anymore.
Yeah. And another part of your story is owning your sexuality. And we didn't even mention the purity culture in your interview. We touched on it hard in Melissa's interview. So if you haven't seen that already, you can go back and watch, whoever's watching here. But yes, purity culture is so extreme in Adventism. And so what you have done is chosen to take the reins on that and do whatever you want to do.
Yes. I guess the ironic thing for me growing up Adventism is that the women in the Bible I looked up to the most were sex workers. It was Queen Esther, who was a concubine, Ruth in the story of Jericho. Because we're supposed to look up to like that one woman in Proverbs, like the good Christian woman type of thing. But I always felt drawn to, there was something about that community, that persona, that person that I always locked into. And so whenever somebody, a spice merchant, that's what I'll call them, whenever a spice merchant would show up in a story or whatnot, I'd be so drawn to her. Like there is an assuredness to those people, like not just women, because like spice merchants are across the board, all genders, demographics and whatnot. There's something about that type of person where even though they are on the receiving end of so much social bias and puritanical superstition, is that there is an integrity there. There is a sense of self and self-assuredness that really called to me, because even though I was trying so hard to embody the good pastor's daughter, I was trying to be that person, I felt so empty and so off kilter and whatnot, that person who's embodying everything I'm not supposed to is confident, assured, moving through life with purpose. And I was like, that just spoke to me in such a way. And so when I was separating from my ex, that was the pandemic, and I ended up stepping into online spice merchantry. And that became like how I could pay my legal fees, how I could feed myself again, secure my own housing. And I noticed as I started moving in that world, that became my income, my business. I started to get it. Like I started understanding where that self-assuredness comes from, because it is you as an adult deciding what part of your body you want to work with. You are the only one who's deciding this. And it actually became the past 5 years doing what I've been doing, aside from the makeup, content creation, community building and stuff. That part of my life and my work has been profoundly fulfilling. It's been a lot of fun. I've gotten to work with so many amazing people, and it's given me the autonomy and the voice, the boundary setting skills that Adventism didn't teach me. There was so much skill building that happened through that work that really ended up filling gaps for me as a woman in regards to like, no, actually, I decide. It's my brain. It is my body. I decide my wellness for me. No, it's the type of life I lead is one that very definitively says mine. Doesn't matter anybody else's superstition. It doesn't matter anybody else's belief system. At the end of the day, my wellness is my own.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the expert in my experience, and I get to operate accordingly. And I ended up experiencing a world where everybody been telling me, oh, to be this type of person, to be a fallen woman means you're empty inside, you're used up, you're this, that, and the other. I've been in it for almost 5 years. I have never felt more vibrant. I've never felt more at peace with myself. Like I've never, like all of these consequences they tell you will automatically happen to you didn't. Instead, I ended up like alive. Like you feel present.
Yeah. And there's so much to say about this. We could probably do an entire episode. I guess for those who are maybe feeling uncomfortable with your line of work, I would just have to say that the power is in the choice. So we're not advocating, at least I'm not advocating one way or another. If you choose to be celibate and only have sex within your marriage, if you choose to be a sex worker, if you choose to do online OnlyFans, all of it is about choice. And that's what we have to continuously bring up, that if you don't agree with something, that's fine, because that's your choice. If you have a consenting adult who choose to do something with their life that isn't harming other people and they feel empowered, then allow them to have that choice without demonizing them for making a decision that you don't agree with. And that's the point of this whole show is choice, autonomy, self-sovereignty. Being able to make that choice for yourself is the point of everything. It's, to me, that's the beauty of life, is being able to choose your reality, to be able to have those experiences that you want to have, and have others allow you to do the same. Because if you agree with purity culture is wrong and harmful for children, you have to also agree that being able to choose whatever you want to do with your body as an adult is also okay. And so I guess I just have to put that disclaimer out there, because I know some people do feel uncomfortable with sex workers or people who choose to do that with their body. And I say the more power to you. If it feels good to you, if you feel fulfilled, if that's something that you are actively choosing and you're not being coerced or groomed into it, then I think that that's great.
If people were to actually like take the time to really like sit with us, talk with us, we'll be very upfront with you in that all work is exploitative at a baseline. Like, your work is going to have exploitative factors just as mine does. However, at the end of the day, worker solidarity is everything. We have more in common with each other than we do to multimillionaires. And also, sex work doesn't have to be empowering. My own experience has been, but there are lots of people who have negative experiences with it. There's plenty of people who are in it specifically just to survive. And I'm in it as a fully grown adult. My prefrontal cortex is already loaded in. I'm engaging with it with an education. I'm engaging with it as an adult. And of course, like, there's a difference between sex work and trafficking. They're not related. They're not correlated. What I do is, as an autonomous adult who decides with my own sovereignty, with my autonomy, what I want to do and what's best for me. So what myself and my community will tell you is, when it comes to our work, that it's our experience. We get the first say in it. And if this is something you want to approach, do so realistically. It is work. It doesn't have to be empowering. Sex work is work at the end of the day. Engage with it accordingly. Engage with it with the same level of gravity you would any other career.
Yeah, all great points. So glad you brought that up. Well, this has been such a great conversation. I'm so happy that we got connected. I just need your Linda listen moment.
Okay. That's right. Because at the end it was like, Linda, listen, listen, listen. I would actually say my Linda listen is to the Adventist church itself, to the people that I left behind. And it is, Linda, listen, you are not the end all be all of wisdom on this planet. You are not the main character of humanity. There is more out there besides the three angels' message. It is disrespectful to other people and other cultures to decide that you know best for everybody. Please actually consider taking all of this stuff to therapy. Please actually consider looking at education and research outside of yourselves for real, because being oriented this strongly towards the end of the world, making your entire thought process focus so intensely on everything coming to an end, is not actually healthy or normal. There's more out there than the end. Being so focused on the end isn't where it's at. We are here right now. We should be focused on each other, on relationships. And if you're focused on the very end, you can't really experience where you are.
Amen. Well said. It's so funny. Every single group, without fail, that I have interviewed from, they all think they are the one true, truthy truth. The truthiest truth that has ever truthed. It's that group.
Yes, main character.
The superiority complex is so real. Every single person faces that. And it's just so funny that we haven't figured out as a species that just doesn't exist, that we're just all humans having a human experience, trying to grasp at straws to find meaning and trying to figure it out without just being okay with not figuring it out. It's okay to not know. It's okay to just live now and do what makes you happy than to just rack your brain with all of these things that we probably will never figure out. And that's okay. It's okay to just not know.
Well, and something that I learned down the road is, like, if you are struggling with anxiety, if you're struggling with like a sense of nihilism, like you're wanting meaning in life, the tools for that type of regulation exist outside of theology. Like, you can go to a counselor or a therapist and get actual concrete tools to help you regulate this stuff that are not related to divine purpose and stuff. There's other things for your brain that exist that can help you just live a normal, healthy, grounded life.
Yeah, for sure. So how can people find you and support you?
All right, so I am across the board on a variety of platforms because I have been existing online since about 2020. So if you're looking to connect with me, just talk with me, the best place to do that is like through Twitch, because then I can just like talk back to like where we have most of the discussions about things like religious trauma and whatnot, usually happens through that live streaming platform. I also have a Discord community where people can talk about this stuff as well. Of course, like, because I am a spice merchant, interact with me according to the platform you're comfortable with, but you can find me across Instagram and TikTok, like, as I do makeup stuff on one side, and then purity culture, like relationship memes, things like that on another. So like I said, like, engage accordingly, according to your comfort level, because I'm across the board.
So your handles are all the same?
Yes. Yeah. You can find me under Rosei Quartz, Rosei Quartz Official, across platforms.
All right. Perfect. Thanks so much for coming on, Rosie. Do you have any final thoughts before we go?
Honestly, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to speak, because like I said, like, the 10-year anniversary of my mom passing, where I didn't actually say anything at her funeral because it didn't feel like the right time. But I think about 10 years later, having the opportunity to speak to an audience about her outside of Adventism means the world to me. And yeah, I just wish everybody who is deconstructing and going through their own process of finding their way, finding their voice, finding their autonomy, the absolute best. You got this. And yeah, just mwah. Thank you very much.
I love it. That's so beautiful. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Leave those words of encouragement down below for Rosie. We appreciate you liking and supporting the post in any sort of way. It boosts the algorithm. If you find a video that you decide it may not be a good fit for you for any type of reason, just turning it on and watching it on mute shows the algorithm that our core audience loves it, and so they boost it out to more people who are not subscribed. So thank you so much for supporting. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness if you want to support further. We have some merch at cults2consciousness.com. We have a clips channel. If you're interested in shorter clips of the channel, you can go visit that page and see some people you may not have seen before yet. And I think that's it. If you like this video, definitely go and watch Melissa. We are doing another Adventist interview tomorrow, so I'm so excited to put that up soon as well. So keep an eye out for that. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.